Buongiorno e benvenuti a tutti a questo nuovo appuntamento organizzato appunto da noi del Career Service. Siamo felici di avervi con noi per questa masterclass che è stata pensata proprio per chi sogna di lavorare all'estero o studiare all'estero e vuole scoprire come costruire un profilo davvero internazionale. Oggi insieme a Diego Mattiolo, School Director di IEF a Londra, parleremo di soft skills, certificazioni linguistiche, esperienze internazionali e chiaramente networking. Quindi sarà un'ora ricca di spunti utili per chi vuole aprirsi al mondo e costruire una carriera, diciamo, oltre confine. Ci tengo a precisare che l'incontro sarà in inglese, ma non preoccupatevi perché durante la diretta sarà comunque possibile fare domande anche in italiano e a questo proposito vi suggerisco di scrivere le vostre domande nella sezione commenti. Poi ci prenderemo gli ultimi 15 minuti più o meno della diretta per appunto rispondere alle vostre curiosità. E nulla, quindi vi invitiamo a restare con noi fino alla fine e a partecipare attivamente. Vi lascio, quindi vi do il benvenuto chiaramente al nostro ospite di oggi e iniziamo.
Hi everyone. So as Ilaria currently said, my name is Diego. I am the school director of EF London. I am Italian, but I was actually schooled abroad. So when I was asked to do this workshop, I thought, you know what, actually doing in English maybe a little bit more interesting, but also I feel a little bit more comfortable doing that. So today, what we really want to talk about is the journey to success. So what are the skills and qualities that we can work on to gain a competitive advantage? And when we're talking about gaining a competitive advantage, we're talking about landing the job that we want, how we can make ourselves shine when we are, for example, going for a job, and what employers really are looking at. So I have the presentation slides, and as Inaria kindly said, please do take the moment and have a read through. If there's anything that you don't understand or if there are questions, do not wait to the very last moment. Feel free to write on the chat, and then at the appropriate moment, we will be having a look at, and I'll get back to you. So, without further hesitation, the journey to success, work on skills, and gain a competitive advantage. Why are we talking about this? Well, I think it's because we are in a bit of a position where right now job trends, job description, and the marketplace as well, when it comes to the job market, it is a little bit different than what it used to be. When we are applying for a job, we are competing against other applications. And very often, having a degree is just not enough. There's lots of people that have degrees, and what grade you have in that degree does not really necessarily make let's just say, does it not come to a make it or break it situation when it comes to that. So what else can we do to gain a competitive advantage and to structure the career so that we can have the job that we want? So this is the idea of looking at skills and qualities, and specifically when it comes down to language skills, and also everything else. So mapping out a future is certainly no easy task. So what career have you decided to pursue? And I do understand that, of course, different job and trends vary. So for sure, this may not be relevant to everyone, but there are some, let's say, common traits that we can identify, and we can anticipate problems and we can anticipate solutions. So choosing a career is definitely the most important decision of the work life. And for some, maybe a straightforward decision. For some, it's not. In my case, it wasn't. I There's no such degree as becoming a school director. So my degree was in something that was completely different. And then eventually landed the job. And lots of it you learn it on the job as well. But how do you get to the stage where you're learning a job? And how can you stand out from your competition? So let's have it and looking a little bit at, like, planning ahead, what we could do. Of course, it's a matter of skills and qualities. Let's differentiate between skills and qualities. Skills in general are something that we can learn, we can improve. Qualities are something intrinsic. Qualities are we have them or we don't have them. Patience, I think, is a quality. You can work a bit on it, but you either are patient or you're not a patient person. But there are some skills, like, for example, managing a team, managing your time management. And these are definitely skills that you can develop even further. Languages are skills that we can develop even further. So started planning ahead by having a good education definitely does work. Of course, while I was saying earlier that final grade may not make or break a job application, it is true that a degree is needed, especially if you want to progress your career. Being fluent in more than one language definitely, again, does really help. Especially for companies that work in a multinational environment, and English is a bit of a must. And what type of English we speak as well does make a difference. If it's an English that is, okay, or if we're fluent, we can have conversations and we can write formally and so on, etc., etc. Interestingly, experienced life abroad is also something that I always recommend when you start planning ahead. And the reason is because by experiencing life abroad, you show your independence as well as open-minded and your flexibility and an adaptability to different contexts. Any kind of work experience, internship, volunteering, of course, adds on to what can make us unique, right? But the question is, what do employers actually look for? So when we are looking at employing someone, when we're looking at the candidate, what we're looking is good communication skills, always. In any job, having good communication skills does help for transparency, for leading a team, for being part of a team, and so on. Same as motivation and initiatives, and work independently, yet being able to follow instructions, being able to be part of an organization. Same as having some leadership skills or working on the leadership skills. And then you can see also the adaptability, something I was referring a little bit earlier, and the emotional control, understanding what is work and what is not, understanding how we can take the feedback on and act on it, and not necessarily taking things personal. And of course, resilience is definitely something that employers look for. Now, if we were to dig down a little bit more onto like the language skills, there is a bit of a question that students usually ask me, which is, how do I prove my language skills to someone? Because of course I can say, I think I'm a B2, I think I'm a C1, but what does that really mean? So there are, let's say, a couple ways that you can think of, but I put down what are the two biggest examinations that can help proving your English skills, as well as, let's say, enrich your portfolio. The first one you may have heard of is called IELTS. If you are more into American English rather than British English, the equivalent is called TOEFL. Now, this is quite peculiar. It's one test for all levels, and it has 4 components. So it has reading, writing, speaking, and listening. Because it's one test for all, it's basically a picture of your level of English. It's not a pass or a fail, but what really is a picture of every single component with an overall that is the average of the scores that you get from the components. The score goes from 0 to 9. Of course, 0 is A1, absolute beginner, and 9 is C2, absolute proficient. This is a test that specifically for the UK, it is needed to get a visa. And there's specific IELTS that is called IELTS UKVI. I know that in Italy there's only one UKVI center, and that UKVI center is in Rome. And the reason why the UKVI is needed is because the test is exactly the same, but there in the report there is a number, and that number is used in the visa application. So once an IELTS is taken, has 2 years validity, and after that it expires. I say expires with the air quotes because, of course, you may still have the language proficiency or the language skills that you've gained, but it cannot be used for the purposes of visa applications. Sometimes in some big companies may also require the IELTS, for example, for job-related matters. So, for example, if you wanted to be a nurse here in the UK and you are not a native speaker, then the IELTS is needed because it's a way of proving that you can actually interact and have the proficiency that is needed to deal with patients, deal with doctors, understanding symptoms, and so on. The IELTS can be taken either on a computer or on a paper test. And when it's taken on the computer, the results are usually given within 3 days. When it's taken on paper, it takes a little bit longer, but you do get the results within 2 weeks. And so it's nice, easy, quick. Unfortunately, I wouldn't say it's cheap. The whole exam in the UK is about £200. So I would assume that in Italy, it would be the equivalent in euros. Different kind of examinations are the Cambridge English tests. So Cambridge English tests probably are very well known all over the world, and they are differentiated by levels. So for example, a B1 level, we have what is called the PAT, the Preliminary English Test. At B2 level, we have what is called the FCE, First Certificate of English. At C1 level, we have what is called the CA, the Certificate of Advanced English. And last but not least, the best one, C2 levels, you have the proficiency, so what we call the CPE. So biggest difference here versus the IELTS is that this is a pass or fail exam. So if you, for example, want to try or sit the CAE and then you do not pass the CAE, but that you get the score of a B2, which is the FCE, then in the certificate paper, you do get Council of Europe level B2, which basically means that you haven't passed the CAE, so you cannot prove the C1 level, but you have the equivalent of a first because you do get a B2 level. It tests 5 skills, really. Like all these exams test 5 skills, as you have the reading, speaking, listening, and writing, and then you also have the use of English. Possibly this is the paper that students find the most difficult, as it is a use of English, it's a bit of grammar related exercises, and depending on the exam, of course, the difficulty does change. So that's also another big difference. On the IELTS is one test for all, and the further your language, the sooner you're able to finish the exam, but also within the time that is given, so the more you're able to do. One is that with the Cambridge English, you still have, of course, the time component, but the whole test is packed at the level that you're testing. So, for example, if you take the CAE, then the whole language of the test is packed at C1. If you're taking the CPE, then it's packed at C2, and so on. So the Cambridge exam is not accepted for visa requests, I'm afraid, but there's these things where it never expires. You hear from the CPE that sometimes, like, it does a validity of 2 years, but that is just because it is a proficiency exam. So, of course, to maintain the proficiency level, you want to make sure that you are still very much have the proficiency level. Now, the best example I can give is when you're learning a language, or when you were learning a language at a certain stage, and then maybe you then stop using that language for a bit, then you want to go back to it, and you find yourself stumbling a little bit across, or you're a bit kind of like, oh, I don't remember how to say this, how to say that. That is what we called reactivating schemata. So from that perspective, proficiency is harder to maintain because it's just that moment where you basically need to be using the language at all times, really. The results are within 6 weeks, so it does take longer. Again, there's the option of either writing it on a paper or a computer. The majority of people that take the Cambridge English exams, usually they take it for academic reason or to enrich their portfolios. I know, for example, that there are a variety of different universities that if you do have a Cambridge English exam and your course also sees an English component or an English exam, you can skip the exam if you do have the equivalent of a Cambridge English. So that's quite interesting, and it's something to enrich your CV. In different languages, you do have like similar exams. So for example, I remember myself doing the German equivalent by the Goethe Institute, or in French, you have the DELF. So again, there are different ways. Now, my piece of advice over here is if you is something that you like to look a little bit more or investigate a bit further, do take the time to research it, do take the time to take some practice paper, and possibly also a course preparation does not hurt. Maybe the IELTS less so, because the IELTS is a picture of your level of English, so it'd be interesting to see what your level of English is at the very moment, but especially with the Cambridge exam. Also, given how much the exam costs, it does make sense for you to be able to be like, okay, I'm fully prepared, I'm going for it. In my school, like in the EF schools, exam preparations usually are for Cambridge English about 10 weeks to have the full preparation, and for the IELTS exam, depending of course on the level where we are and the level where we want to be. However, we never suggest, I would say, we wouldn't suggest to do anything that is less than possibly 8 weeks, because again, you want to have the time to fully prepare and work on the weakest components and so on. So that is definitely one way to be looking at your language skills and to be looking at how to prove your language skills to possibly an employer or to gain a competitive advantage. And again, with the idea of enriching your curriculum vitae, enriching your CV, your resume, and shine. So here we go. My colleagues did put the preparation slide of like how, for example, in EF it works. We do run 32 lessons a week. Every lesson is about 40 minutes, and it's all about getting ready for every single component by having what we call the general English classes or the exam classes that they focus on that, and what we call special interest classes that can also focus a little bit on the weaknesses, grammar, usually for Italian students, if you don't mind me saying, and potentially even speaking. Sometimes someone can be very fluent and go for it, but not necessarily accurate. So that's the difference between fluency and accuracy. Where fluency, we can have a conversation, but maybe the verbs that we're using, the words that we're using, they're not necessarily the right ones. So it is important when we take an exam to be thinking about that, because we're not just looking at fluency, but we're looking at fluency as well as accuracy. We then have project sessions and lectures to embellish our programs even further. Another course that is quite relevant is working on some skills. So we do have developed these courses that are called career skills certificates, career skills certificate courses. And what they really look at is some specific special interest classes. Now, when we're talking about classes that are a bit specific, and maybe they are in English, but they step away from the grammar points or the English points, then we're talking about ESP, so some like classes that actually are run in English, but that are being more specific with aim. And the aim usually is, again, to either gather more knowledge or go a little bit deeper in one on the topic. Take it as kind of like some workshops that they really help, um, you know, building up our career while doing it in English and living abroad. So all a bit like the parts that we were talking about earlier, where you can embellish your CV even more. So in the school, for example, here where we are, we do run days every Monday with a minimum length of 6 weeks, and they really deep dive into different subjects that I'll show you in a second. Good to say the minimum level for both an exam preparation and this is B1. To be honest, with the exam preparation, I think that the minimum level should be maybe a little bit higher, because at B1 or B2 level, you are still learning the language, and especially the grammar structures, as well as the vocabulary and so on. So I think that is a bit kind of like, I have the same idea of like the metaphor of riding a horse or building a house. Like, when you ride a horse, you don't learn how to uh, gallop immediately. You learn how to walk, trot, and then eventually canter. And it's a little bit the same way. So when you're learning a language, you're not going to go from 0 to 100, but you're going to learn the basics first. And then once you're confident, you can re-polish the language a little bit more. So there are different career skills courses that we run in different parts of the world. So in the UK, there are 2 schools, London and Oxford. And London, for example, focuses on social media marketing and entrepreneurship, as well as film studies and media and journalism. So basically one set is more kind of like a business setting, and the other set with business English, which to be honest is one of the most requested topics in the school, and the other one is more kind of like media and art related. And then you can see from the slides that other destination may focus on different aspects. So for example, Toronto will be looking more at presentation skills and global issues, so something that is a little bit different. Again, very interesting. Usually, like here in London, I do have a big set of customers that are maybe a little bit more mature. They're not necessarily like the 16, 17 or 18 years old, but they are like 25 plus, 30 plus, that they have a job, they have a career, or they want to learn one, and they are very, very keen on investing to then get a return in investment, whatever that may be, whether it is work related, or as I said a bit earlier, for your CV and resume and so on. So something to look forward to. Of course, I'm from EF, so I am very keen to let you know what EF offers. But if we wanted to take a step away a little bit from EF and more looking at the reason why we met today, talking about skills and qualities and how to be successful, then any kind of course that is being given and that is validated, by the way, by an institution could be helpful for you. You may notice as well, if you're not, I highly recommend that you do that. If you have a LinkedIn profile, is one of the most one of the most used social networks for, I would say, both employers and employees these days. And the idea is that, you use it a little bit as a live resume, a live CV, and again, emphasis on that networking and the emphasis on shining and see how you have gained the competitive advantage or what makes you unique compared to others. So when you take a qualification of some sort, I've noticed, for example, there's the trend also of putting on LinkedIn, state it like, maybe like little paragraph about what you learned and how great it was, etc., etc. And the idea behind it, again, is a little bit like to celebrate, but also that you add that skills to that profile. And when recruiters, for example, when you send a CV, It's very common right now that the first thing that you do is an online check, and you actually do go land on LinkedIn, and it is quite interesting to then be able to see the profile and what else is there, the comments, etc., etc. Speaking of which, that's another thing. Maybe it steps a little bit away from the skills of success, but it's a very, very highly recommended piece of advice that I like to give, specifically to the ones that are yet to go to the job market. Please do clean up your social medias. When you send a CV, one of the first things that you do is to Google the name. And, we do live in an era where we are completely interconnected at all time. So if there's anything that you would consider inappropriate and it's on Instagram or Facebook and the profile is not completely secure, and maybe you can just Google it, you find it, or you find an image, you may want to think about that as well, because it's an introductory card and it's a little bit of perception that you want to portray about yourself. So I have this exercise where I ask my students, for example, to Google themselves and then see what happens. And if you were happy to what you say, if you weren't, and take actually action based on that. So the academic portfolio that we give, a little bit like, again, related to LinkedIn, but is all about having something to show, some physical evidence. That would be like, for example, here in the EF, we give different certificates. One of them is the course certificate, but also the course report and the language assessment. And the language assessment is a fantastic piece of paper that tells you what you can do with that language, and again can be given like a little bit of a can-do statement based on levels. We also have specific test, English test, that is called the FSAT, and again proves a little bit the level that you are at that very specific moment in time. If then you're taking an English exam or you're taking a career skill course, then there's an additional piece of certificate that could be added on with the idea of enriching your portfolio. So this is a little bit like what I came up with for you, but please, if you do have any questions or any comments or anything at all, please do use the chat, and we can take a little bit of time to discuss this a little bit further. There's going to be a bit of an awkward silence while I wait to see if there's anything in the chat at all, but I'll try to avoid the silence. Oh, Ilaria, welcome back.
Perfetto, c'è stato un po' un momento, il wifi non andava, quindi la rete è un po' instabile. Ok, allora, non so se ci sono commenti o comunque domande, curiosità, qualcosa che magari vi ha colpito di questa presentazione. In realtà nel frattempo vorrei farla io una domanda, se è possibile. Riguarda un po' più la questione dei certificati, che penso sia una domanda forse anche comune agli altri. Quale certificazione è più vantaggiosa in ambito lavorativo? Lo IELTS o il Cambridge?
Allora, facciamo che questa domanda ti rispondo in italiano, dato che mi è stata posta in italiano. Questa è una domanda, in realtà, ti ringrazio per questa domanda, Ilaria, perché è una domanda che mi fanno tanti studenti: qual è meglio?
Ecco.
E di solito io rispondo, come alla Marzullo, rispondo a una domanda con un'altra domanda. E la mia domanda è: perché vorresti fare la certificazione? Perché, per esempio, se tu mi dicessi ma sarebbe meglio prepararsi per l'IELTS o per il Cambridge, e io dico, ok, ma cosa vuoi fare te nella vita? Io voglio fare l'università all'estero, IELTS. E il motivo è perché comunque l'IELTS è necessario per il visto, è accettato da tutte le università ed è per 2 anni, lo fai, lo prendi, fai la domanda, job done.
Ok.
Se invece mi dici, guarda, non è che abbia programmi vari in questo momento, non lo farei per qualcosa di specifico, lo farei per me, per dimostrare le mie competenze linguistiche, per metterlo sul curriculum, allora il Cambridge, assolutamente, perché da quel punto di vista Cambridge, a parte essere un'istituzione, è un nome, tutti lo conoscono ed ha proprio questa validità che è per sempre. Una volta che tu lo fai lo passi è per sempre, non ha una scadenza. Quindi ecco, quando mi viene chiesto per qual è meglio, io di solito rigiro un po' la domanda sul...
Dipende dall'obiettivo,
Esatto,
quindi.
e Sara ha fatto questa domanda e dice, is it better to do an EF certification or the IELTS for working abroad? Again, Sarah, I think it is a little bit, sorry, now I'm going to talk in English because you asked me in English, so thank you very much for doing that. I think the reason is a little bit, where is abroad? IELTS is well known in the UK and as well as Australia. Of course, you were talking about the US, they will have no idea what you're talking about because over there is all about the TOEFL, which is the equivalent of the IELTS, but just in American English rather than British English. Now, if by working abroad, you need to have, let's say, an IELTS because it needs to be sponsored by the visa and so on, then of course the IELTS is a must. You have to do it. But again, it also depends a little bit on the preparation that you've had before. If you have any kind of preparation or no preparation whatsoever, if you haven't seen the exam, not at all, then if you've never had any preparation, you've never seen the exam, you're just thinking about it, then an EF course can kind of like almost work in parallel. It could be like a nice way of joining the two so that you can be ready for the next step. But if you are familiar with the certificate, you're familiar with the exam, you're familiar with the paper, you feel confident about taking it, then go for it. So again, of course, I'm quite biased. I work for EF and I do have my beautiful school over here. At the same time, I'm also thinking, again, it depends a little bit on what your objectives are, but also how much do you know? If you were to take an IELTS tomorrow, would you know what you would score? Would you know what's your weakest component? Would you know what is yours, where your strengths lie, and so on? 3 years ago, I got an ESOL certificate. Is it a certificate that I have to renew? When you talk about an ESOL certificate, Miriam, are you talking about I'm not quite sure what ESOL certificate you're referring to, because that would kind of question, let's say, the validity. If it's like an ESOL certificate, it's a TOEFL certificate to be able to teach, and that has been done online, you probably would have some limitations on what you can teach or to whom. But if you're talking about an ESOL certificate, like the IELTS or the Cambridge, is a little bit of what, or like who is the body that has the authority body that has actually put the stamp of approval on the exam. As a rule of thumb, usually it also depends a little bit on the level, to be fair. If it's a language cert, for example, which is another language qualification, then again, yes, it does come with an expiration date. So it would be a little bit depending on who has issued the certificate in terms of, like, who has put the stamp of approval. Sarah says thanks, and I say very, very welcome. So I don't know if Miriam, if you want to elaborate even further, or if you have the certificate with you and you say, if you don't have the certificate with you and you'd like to, for me to have a look, you're also more than welcome to reach out to EF Italy. My colleague Valentina is actually here to support me today, and she will then be able, to pass it on to me, and I will be able to have a look and then get back to you and let you know whether the validity is forever or not, based on what certificate is. Don't know if there's anyone else here. Vale, hi.
Eccoci qua.
Ciao. Well, I wanted to
domanda.
Volevo chiedere se sapeva quale certificato servirebbe per frequentare l'università o dottorato in Danimarca. Okay, very interesting. So Denmark is within the European Union, and of course Italy is within the European Union, so you don't need a certificate that has that, like the UK, for example, that since Brexit unfortunately is no longer in the European Union and therefore is needed for the visa. Now, the majority of universities are really well familiar with the word of IELTS, and some of them have Cambridge English exam as well. Usually, when you're looking, for example, at a university degree or you're looking at a PhD, on the university websites, they do have a page that talks about language requirements, and they write it down what the language requirement is. Because sometimes it's not even like, even if it was the IELTS, for example, is well recommended by everyone, then the question is, how much of a score do they need? Because, for example, some university may require a 6 overall, which is like, borderline C1, but some university may require a 7 overall, which is like C2. And it also depends a little bit on what course you're taking, like what degree, what is the final aim. PhD level usually is what is required to be higher. So I would say IELTS as a rule of thumb, but I would also say when you go into the website, please do go into language requirement, have a look, because it's always good to see not only what they want, what they would accept and so on, but also the precise score that they need in order for you admitted onto the course program. I'm a bit of a chatter, so what happens is that you ask me a question and then I go off the tangent for a good 5 to 10 minutes. Sorry about that. You're very, very welcome, Sylvia. In the meantime, if there are more questions, do please write them in the comments. But in the meantime, I just want to say thank you very much to all of you who have taken the time to actually, be with us today. So thank you, Miriam. I see in the paper certificate there is ISO International CFR Level B2. I took an online course. Again, by not knowing the issuing body, I can't really say if it's forever or not, but just by looking at that, reading, use of English, writing, listening, speaking, interaction, it is a proof of your English level. Again, what I would suggest is if you want to send the certificates over to Valentina and Italy, she can have a look and then we can let you know. Usually, if you took an online course and that was the results of the certificate of an online course, it could also be that it doesn't really carry validity, or better, it does carry an internal validity that you can use to prove your English, but it cannot be used as external validity, which basically means that, for example, at the university or a school may not recognize it, or it may not be acceptable for visa reasons, but the employers could see it as a way of a proof of your level of English at that precise moment in time. So there may not be a need for you to retake it just because it expired, because it is a bit of a question, again, why do you need it for? So if it's a B2 level and is to actually look at your English skills and put it down like in your CV that you have that proves that you have your B2 level, happy days to have it. I wouldn't say take it again tomorrow. Absolutely not. It's there. What would be fascinating is to find out what validity it carries. So for example, the EF certificates, they are recognized by employers, but not necessarily by the universities, because again, they are linked to the internal or external validation bodies. So again, I say rule of thumb, I say it's okay for you to have it, and then of course, if you want to go into more specifics, do get in touch with us and we can let you know.
Ok, non so se ci sono altre domande, però già queste hanno ravvivato un po' il discorso. Magari ci prendiamo qualche altro minuto per far altre domande. Io ne avrei un'altra.
Invito anche Ilaria per avermi dato, ti ringrazio anche dell'invito, per avermi dato la piattaforma.
Assolutamente.
La tua domanda?
Sì, avevo io una domanda un po' più, diciamo, sul valore del percorso, ecco, di IF. In che modo questo percorso aiuta a migliorare la propria employability?
Guarda, ci sono talmente tante risposte che potrei darti in questo momento. Una delle mie risposte, per esempio, è anche in base sull'inglese, l'inglese stesso.
Ecco.
Ora, ovviamente, magari tutti abbiamo una rispolverata, non è tanto magari il livello a se stesso, però io ovviamente quando parlo ho un tipo di accento
Certo.
e le nostre classi sono molto internazionali. Le nostre classi hanno un insegnante e 17 studenti e gli studenti arrivano da ogni parte del mondo. Francesi, cinesi, giapponesi, coreani, ognuno con diversi tipi di accenti. Ora, ti sembrerà stupido, ma quando si lavora per una multinazionale non si parla solamente con l'inglese che ha fatto l'università a Cambridge o l'americano che ha fatto l'università a Princeton, ma si va a parlare con una serie di colleghi che sono da ogni parte del mondo e ognuno porta degli accenti diversi. Quindi
Certo.
anche solamente allenare
Ascoltare.
l'orecchio
Mhm.
a capire tutti i diversi tipi di accenti, a capire e a saper rispondere, dipendentemente poi dall'inglese, anche l'idea di saper cambiare registro, perché io parlo, adesso che parlavo con voi, parlavo inglese in un certo modo. Quando sono a casa mia non parlo proprio inglese così, ci sono altri tipi diversi di slang o di parole o di frasi che vengono usate, come in italiano. Lo stesso modo in
Esatto.
italiano quando vuoi scrivere un'email quando scrivi un messaggio su WhatsApp o quando scrivi un'email professionale sono due diversi tipi di linguaggio, giusto? Quindi
Certo, sì, anche due forme diverse.
e la stessa cosa avviene in realtà anche in inglese. Quindi come poi ancora maggior ragione per quanto mi riguarda dal punto di vista proprio britannico, inglesi sono anche ben conosciuti per essere indiretti nelle forme, non manderemo mai un'email con scritto fai questo, giusto? Quindi anche un po' l'idea di come viene usata la lingua stessa, la padronanza della lingua. Ecco, poi in base un attimino anche al punto di prepartenza, ci si focalizza su degli aspetti più che altri. Per esempio, se si parte con un livello B1, B2, l'esposizione ai vocaboli e quindi quanto si impara, quanto in realtà ci si immerge nella lingua è fondamentale. Se magari si ha già un livello C1, C2, si è già una padronanza, quindi da quel punto di vista in realtà ci si va ad allenare un attimino di più sulla naturalizzazione, cioè su come le frasi vengono fatte in inglese, in italiano. Io uso sempre lo stesso esempio. In Italia si impara "It's raining cats and dogs", right? Dalla serie, questa frase, questo idiom su quando piove, "It's raining cats and dogs". Non la usa assolutamente nessuno qua,
Nessuno.
ma proprio nessuno. Allora la domanda è: ok, se non lo usa nessuno, che cosa viene usato? Ecco, non te lo dico. Però faccio il teaser di Netflix. Però ci sono altre forme che vengono usate ovviamente, altri tipi di linguaggio, altri tipi di slang. Quindi è proprio questa conoscenza anche e a livello della lingua capire un attimino qual è il registro che si ha, la padronanza della lingua e come aumentare questa padronanza stessa.
Ok,
Oh,
c'è
yeah,
qualcuno?
no, I think that was for me, I think, but maybe not. Your language is so fluent. Thank you. Come ripeto, in realtà ho fatto le scuole qui, però ti ringrazio molto.
Hai allenato, quindi.
Penso che sia proprio quest'idea comunque anche dell'immersione. Sai, io posso fare anche un corso 1 ora alla settimana, 2 ore alla settimana, eccetera. Poi esco per dire, non so, sono a Milano, per esempio, poi esco, vado a fare l'aperitivo e in realtà parlo italiano e poi vado a casa e parlo italiano. Quindi il corso si fa, si acquisisce la lingua, per l'amor del cielo non dico di no, però è assolutamente diverso da fare un corso dove, per esempio, si viene qua a lezione, si fa la classe e poi si va a fare l'aperitivo, ma si fa in inglese perché ci sono diverse nazionalità, diversi amici e si è in Inghilterra, quindi bisogna parlare per forza inglese. Poi si va nell'accommodation e si parla inglese. Quindi c'è proprio questo processo di essere completamente immerso nella lingua, che secondo me è il motivo per cui EF come compagnia è una compagnia ancora valida, perché non è solamente l'idea dell'insegnare l'inglese, ma è l'idea del vivere l'inglese, che è completamente differente.
Ok, ci sono, vi avevo persi per un momento. Ok, allora io direi che, diciamo, se non ci sono ulteriori domande, possiamo sicuramente liberare i nostri ospiti.
Assolutamente.
E nulla, io voglio ricordare, che questa registrazione sarà inserita nelle risorse utili, quindi in qualsiasi momento potete andare a riguardarla. E che se ci sono ulteriori domande che magari al momento diciamo, non vi sovvengono, ma volete comunque diciamo, farle, potete scrivere, ecco, in sovraimpressione c'è l'indirizzo mail.
Non so se è bloccata, però
Sì, mi
magari lo
sa
dico
che si
io.
è bloccata.
careerservice@unipegaso.it.
Eccomi, in realtà sì, scusate, evidentemente
Ok,
ha perso il
mi sentite
Ci siamo.
Ok, quindi diciamo, ripeto, potete scrivere tranquillamente a questo indirizzo mail e noi chiaramente le gireremo ai nostri ospiti. Io ringrazio Diego e Valentina per questo intervento veramente molto utile, ma soprattutto ricco di spunti. Sicuramente ci saranno altre occasioni, quindi diciamo, vi terremo aggiornati. E grazie ancora e un in bocca al lupo a tutti quelli che ci hanno seguito.
Have a nice day. Bye bye.
A presto!